David Carter's hands were freezing as he stepped out of the small grocery store, gripping the paper bag with the last of his weekly essentials. But it wasn't the cold that made him stop in his tracks. It was the sight of an elderly woman, struggling to balance 2 heavy grocery bags on the narrow sidewalk. He watched for a moment, debating. He was already running late to pick up Lily from her friend's house, and the thought of her waiting, wondering where he was, made his chest tighten. But the woman, with her hunched shoulders and trembling hands, looked so frail that he couldn't just walk past her. David shifted his bag to one arm and approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice kind but hesitant. "Would you like some help with those?" The woman turned her head, her silver hair tucked neatly under a soft wool hat. She wore a dark green coat that looked warm but well worn, and her cheeks were flushed from the crisp autumn air. For a moment she seemed unsure, her blue eyes studying him carefully. Then, with a small, relieved smile, she nodded. "Thank you, young man. That's very kind of you," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm Eleanor, by the way." "David," he replied, taking the bags from her hands. He was surprised by how heavy they were, and couldn't help but glance at her thin arms, wondering how she'd managed to carry them this far. "Where to?" "It's just a few blocks from here," she said, motioning down the sidewalk. "I didn't realize how heavy they'd be when I bought them." David adjusted his grip on the bags and fell into step beside her. The walk was slow, partly because of the weight of the groceries, and partly because Eleanor's pace was unhurried. "Do you live nearby?" she asked after a few moments of silence. David nodded. "Not too far. Just a little apartment a couple of streets over. It's just me and my daughter, Lily. She's 8. He didn't mean to share so much, but something about Eleanor's gentle demeanor made it easy to talk. Eleanor smiled warmly. 8 is a lovely age, full of curiosity and energy, I imagine. David chuckled despite himself. "Yeah, she keeps me on my toes, that's for sure." He hesitated, then added, "It's not always easy, just the 2 of us. But we manage." Eleanor glanced at him, her smile softening. "It sounds like she's lucky to have a father who cares so much." David shrugged, feeling a mix of pride and the familiar weight of worry that came with being a single parent. "I do my best," he said simply. When they reached her house, a modest, charming bungalow with a small garden out front, Eleanor paused at the gate. "This is me," she said, turning to him. "You've been such a help, David. I don't know how I would have managed without you." "It's no trouble," he said, setting the bags down on her porch. "Really?" Eleanor placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but sincere. "You've done more than you know. The world needs more people like you." David felt his ears heat up at the compliment, and he quickly waved it off. "Just doing what anyone would do," he said, though he wasn't sure that was true. She straightened up, wincing slightly as she adjusted her posture. "Would you like to come in for a cup of tea? It's the least I can offer." David shook his head, glancing at his watch. "I'd love to, but I've got to pick up Lily. She's waiting for me." Eleanor nodded, understanding. "Of course. Well, thank you again, David. Truly." He gave her a small smile and turned to leave, his thoughts already shifting back to his own worries, bills piling up, rent due in a week, and the nagging concern that his car might not last much longer. Still, as he walked away, he felt a surprising sense of lightness. It wasn't every day that you got to help someone, even in a small way, and for a brief moment, it made his own burdens feel a little less heavy. 2 weeks had passed since David helped Eleanor with her groceries, and life had returned to its usual grind. Saturday morning had arrived, bringing with it a crisp chill that hinted winter was just around the corner. David and his daughter Lily were at the small neighborhood grocery store, weaving through the aisles as David stuck closely to his shopping list. His wallet, thin and worn at the edges, was tucked into his jacket pocket, and he was acutely aware of how little was inside it. "Can we get these, Dad?" Lily asked, her brown eyes hopeful as she held up a box of chocolate chip cookies. David crouched down to her level, smiling despite the pang of guilt in his chest. "Not this time, sweetie. We've got to stick to the list." He tapped the piece of paper in his hand, its edges crumpled from being folded and unfolded too many times. "Maybe next week." Lily nodded, her disappointment fleeting. At 8 years old, she was already used to hearing "maybe next time," and it broke David's heart every time he had to say it. She placed the box back on the shelf without complaint and skipped ahead to the next aisle, her ponytail bouncing behind her. David straightened up, rubbing the back of his neck as he resumed scanning the shelves for the items he needed. He was so focused on calculating the price of a carton of milk that he almost didn't hear the soft voice behind him. "David." He turned, surprised to see Eleanor standing there with a basket in her hand. She was dressed warmly, her green coat buttoned up to her chin and a knitted scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. Her blue eyes lit up with recognition, and a warm smile spread across her face. "Eleanor," David said, returning the smile. "It's good to see you again." "And you," she replied. "What a pleasant surprise. I was just picking up a few things for the weekend." She glanced past him and spotted Lily, who was examining a display of apples. "Is that your daughter?" David nodded. "That's Lily. She's the light of my world." Eleanor's smile softened. "She's beautiful." She waved gently to catch Lily's attention. "Hello there, young lady." Lily turned, her eyes wide with curiosity. She walked over to her dad, clutching an apple in her small hands. "Hi," she said shyly, sticking close to David's side. David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Lily, this is Eleanor. I helped her with her groceries a couple of weeks ago." "It's lovely to meet you, Lily," Eleanor said warmly. "Your dad told me all about you. He said you're very curious and full of energy." Lily beamed, clearly pleased by the compliment. "I like to read a lot," she offered, her voice gaining confidence. "Dad says books can take you anywhere." "He's absolutely right," Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling. "Books are magical that way." David watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and unease. He wasn't used to strangers showing such genuine interest in his life, and while Eleanor seemed kind, he couldn't help but feel a little self-conscious. His struggles were written all over him, from his worn-out sneakers to the careful way he calculated every dollar he spent. "Dad, can we get this apple?" Lily asked, holding it up for him to see. David nodded. "Sure thing, kiddo." Eleanor glanced at the items in David's cart, her gaze lingering just long enough for him to notice. He felt a flush of embarrassment rise up his neck. She didn't say anything, but her expression softened, as if she understood more than he was comfortable sharing. "Lily," Eleanor said, her tone light and cheerful. "Do you have a favorite snack?" Lily's face lit up. "I love chocolate, chip cookies." David opened his mouth to protest, but before he could say anything, Eleanor was already reaching for the box Lily had admired earlier. "Then I think we should get these," she said, placing them in David's cart, and handed him the money. "Oh no, Eleanor, you don't have to do that," David said quickly, his voice firm but polite. "Really, we're fine." "Nonsense," Eleanor replied, waving off his objection. "It's just a small treat. Consider it a thank you for your kindness the other day." David hesitated, his pride warring with his gratitude. He didn't want to accept charity, but the look on Lily's face, pure, unfiltered joy, was enough to make him relent. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "That's very generous of you." Eleanor placed a hand gently on his arm, her touch warm despite the chill in the air. "You deserve good things, David," she said softly. Don't ever forget that. David swallowed hard, nodding as he looked down at Lily, who was clutching the box of cookies, like it was a treasure. Thank you, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor smiled and straightened up. I'd better finish my shopping. It was wonderful to see you both. Take care, David. And you too, Lily. Bye, Lily called, waving enthusiastically as Eleanor walked away. David watched her go, a strange mix of emotions swirling in his chest. Gratitude, humility, and something else he couldn't quite name. He looked down at Lily, who was still grinning from ear to ear. Come on, kiddo, he said, ruffling her hair. Let's finish up and get home. As they made their way to the checkout, David couldn't help but replay Eleanor's words in his mind. You deserve good things, David. It was such a simple statement, but it carried a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe it might be true. Another month had passed, and the November air had turned sharper, carrying the unmistakable bite of winter. David sat at the small kitchen table in his apartment, staring down at a stack of unopened envelopes. The rent was overdue, the car needed repairs he couldn't afford, and there was barely enough left in his bank account for groceries. He pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to ward off the headache that was steadily building. Lily was in the next room, humming a tune while drawing on a piece of scrap paper. Her giggles occasionally floated into the kitchen as she narrated a little story to her stuffed animals. David smiled faintly at the sound. She was his anchor, his reason for pushing forward, even when everything felt like it was crumbling around him. A sudden knock at the door startled him. He hadn't been expecting anyone. Rising from his chair, he glanced through the peephole and felt his breath catch. Eleanor stood outside, bundled in her green coat and scarf, clutching a small bag in her hands. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, and her breath formed small clouds in the chilly air. David opened the door, his surprise evident. Eleanor, what are you doing here? She smiled warmly. I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to stop by and thank you properly. May I come in? David hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the living room where Lily was playing. His apartment wasn't much, just a small, two-bedroom space with mismatched furniture and a lingering draft no amount of blankets could seem to fix. But Eleanor's expression was so genuine, so full of warmth, that he found himself stepping aside. Of course, please come in. Eleanor stepped inside, her eyes taking in the modest space without a hint of judgment. Instead, her focus quickly shifted to Lily, who had paused mid-story to peek around the corner. Hello, Lily, Eleanor said, her voice soft and inviting. It's so nice to see you again. Lily's face lit up as she recognized Eleanor. Hi, she said, bouncing over with her usual enthusiasm. Are you here to visit us? Eleanor chuckled. I am. I brought something for you both. She held up the small bag in her hand. It's nothing much. Just some treats I thought you might enjoy. David's brow furrowed slightly. Eleanor, you didn't have to do that. She waved off his protest, setting the bag on the table. It's just a few cookies and some tea. I thought it might be nice to share. Lily clapped her hands together. Cookies! Thank you, Miss Eleanor. David couldn't help but smile at his daughter's excitement. Thank you, he said, his voice quieter but sincere. That was very kind of you. Eleanor took a seat at the table, motioning for David to join her. Lily, sensing the adults needed to talk, grabbed a cookie and retreated back to her drawing, content to enjoy the treat in her little world. David sat down across from Eleanor, his hands clasped together. So, what brings you here? He asked, keeping his tone polite but curious. Eleanor took a moment before answering, her gaze steady and kind. I've been thinking about you, David, about how much you've done for your daughter, and for me. It's rare to meet someone who gives so freely, even when they're struggling themselves. David looked down at his hands, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to being the focus of someone's praise, and it made him uncomfortable. Eleanor continued, her voice gentle but firm. I know things haven't been easy for you. I could see it that day at the store, even if you didn't say anything. And I want you to know that it's okay to accept help when it's offered. David glanced up, his pride flaring for just a moment. I appreciate that, Eleanor, but we're managing. It's tough, but we get by. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, setting it on the table between them. This isn't about charity, she said, anticipating his reaction. It's about recognizing someone who deserves a chance to breathe, to build something better for themselves and their family. David stared at the envelope, his heart pounding. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It's $10,000, Eleanor said simply. I want you to use it however you need, whether that's paying off bills, fixing your car, or saving for Lily's future. I trust you to make the right choices. David's first instinct was to push it away, to tell her he couldn't accept something so generous. But the weight of his struggles, the constant gnawing worry about how he would make it through the next month, held him back. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes searching hers for an explanation. Why? He asked finally. Why would you do this? For me? Eleanor smiled, her expression soft but resolute. Because you remind me of someone I loved very much, my late husband. He believed, as I do, that kindness deserves to be met with kindness. And because I see how hard you're trying, David, you've given so much to others. It's time someone gave back to you. David felt a lump rise in his throat, and he swallowed hard, trying to find the words. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Eleanor replied. Just promise me you'll use it to make things better for yourself and Lily. That's all I ask. Lily wandered back into the room, holding up her drawing proudly. Look, Daddy. It's us and Miss Eleanor. David glanced at the picture, a simple but sweet depiction of the three of them standing under a bright yellow sun. He felt his eyes sting as he looked back at Eleanor. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Eleanor reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. You already have, David. More than you know. For the first time in months, David felt a sense of hope, a real, tangible hope that things could get better. And as he glanced at Lily, still beaming with pride over her drawing, he knew he wouldn't let this opportunity go to waste. 3 months later, David stood in his small but now warmer apartment, the hum of a repaired heater filling the air. The drafty windows had been sealed, the overdue bills were no longer stacked on the kitchen table, and for the first time in years, there was a sense of calm in his home. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but the suffocating weight of impending financial collapse had finally begun to lift. The envelope Eleanor had given him still sat in his top dresser drawer, no longer full but carefully preserved as a reminder of the turning point it had created. With the money, David had caught up on his rent, fixed his aging car, and even managed to replace the threadbare winter coat Lily had outgrown. Most importantly, he had enrolled in an online course for a certification in electrical repair, a skill he had dabbled in during his younger years, but never had the means to formalize. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a step toward something better. Lily skipped into the room, clutching a small, colorful flyer in her hands. Daddy, look, she said, waving it excitedly in front of him. David took the paper and read it aloud. Community Winter Festival Saturday at 5 p.m. Hot cocoa, crafts, and live music. He smiled down at her. This looks fun, kiddo. Can we go? Please? Lily asked, her eyes wide with hope. David chuckled. We'll see. I've got to finish up some work first, but if I can get it done in time, we'll go. Lily threw, her arms around his waist, squeezing tightly. "You're the best, Daddy." David ruffled her hair affectionately and sent her off to finish her homework. As he watched her disappear into her room, he couldn't help but marvel at how much lighter life had started to feel. There were still challenges, plenty of them, but for the first time in years, he felt like he could meet them head-on. Saturday arrived quickly, and David managed to finish his work just in time to keep his promise. Bundled in their warmest clothes, he and Lily walked hand in hand to the festival, the streets glowing with festive lights and the scent of cinnamon and pine in the air. The laughter of children echoed around them as they approached the small town square. Lily immediately spotted the craft table and tugged at David's arm. "Can I go make something, Daddy?" "Go ahead," David said with a grin, watching her dart toward the table, where a group of kids was decorating ornaments. He stayed back, content to let her enjoy herself. "David," a familiar voice called from behind him. He turned to see Eleanor, wrapped in her evergreen coat and scarf, her cheeks rosy from the cold. She was carrying a steaming cup of cocoa in one hand and waved with the other. "Eleanor," David said, smiling warmly, "I didn't expect to see you here." She handed him the cocoa. "I thought I might run into you and Lily. This festival has always been one of my favorite traditions." David accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth spreading through his fingers. "Thank you. It's nice to see you." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Lily, who was intently painting an ornament with bright red and gold. "She's such a bright little girl," Eleanor said softly. "And she looks so happy." "She is," David replied, his voice filled with quiet pride. "She's been through a lot, but she's resilient. I think she gets that from her mom." Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. "And you, David, don't sell yourself short. You've done an incredible job raising her." David looked down, feeling a familiar mix of pride and humility. "I've had some help," he admitted, glancing at Eleanor. "I don't think I can ever fully express how much you've done for us." Eleanor reached out and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You've done the hard work, David. I just gave you a little nudge. And seeing how much you've accomplished, it makes me so proud." David hesitated, then said, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. I started taking an online course to get certified in electrical repair. It's something I've been wanting to do for years, but I never had the chance. Now, with everything you've done for us, I can finally make it happen." Eleanor's face lit up with genuine delight. "David, that's wonderful news. I knew you were capable of great things." "It's still a work in progress," David said, shrugging modestly. "But it feels good to be working toward something, to have a plan." Eleanor nodded, her smile unwavering. "A plan is the first step to a better future, and you're setting such a strong example for Lily. She's lucky to have a father like you." David felt a lump rise in his throat, but before he could respond, Lily came bounding over, holding up her freshly painted ornament. "Look, Daddy, isn't it pretty?" "It's beautiful, sweetheart," David said, crouching down to admire her work. "You did a great job." Lily turned to Eleanor, holding the ornament out to her. "Do you want it, Miss Eleanor? You've been so nice to us." Eleanor's eyes glistened with emotion as she took the ornament carefully in her hands. "Thank you, Lily. This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received." Lily beamed, her cheeks red from the cold, and her joy infectious. "You're welcome." David straightened up, his heart full as he watched the exchange. The three of them stood together, surrounded by the soft glow of Christmas lights and the gentle hum of holiday music. For the first time in a long time, David felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: peace. As the evening wore on, they shared more laughter, stories, and cocoa. Eleanor spoke fondly of her late husband, sharing bits of wisdom he had passed down to her. David listened intently, soaking in her words, and marveling at the bond that had grown between them. When it was time to leave, Eleanor gave Lily a warm hug and placed a hand on David's shoulder. "You know where to find me if you ever need anything," she said. "But I have a feeling you're going to be just fine." David smiled, his gratitude unspoken, but deeply felt. "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything." As he and Lily walked, home under the starry sky, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with the support of people like Eleanor and the unshakable bond he shared with Lily, he knew they could face whatever came their way.